So it is in your note card. We're also recording live the podcast for Podpoint. So that'll get, once that's finished, once we finish recording it, it'll get uploaded and you'll be able to listen to it on iTunes or iHeartRadio. Take your pick. But it does get broadcast. That has been such a blessing and such a surprise. I'm still trying to figure out how we ended up with the podcast with 6,000 viewers or listeners. I'm still in shock. But everybody can hear me okay, correct? I asked once. I didn't remember seeing anybody answer. Oh yeah, there we go. I see some people saying yes. Okay, I see it now. I missed it earlier. I was talking. That's what I get. So if you got your Bibles with you, and I hope you do, we're going to turn to the book of Revelation tonight. And we're going to be looking at chapters 15 and 16. Now, one of the reasons we're going to be looking, remember, the reason we started this whole purpose was not to create confusion for the Christian or cause division in the church or even promote speculation about the coming of Christ. Instead, the book was written to give unshakable hope to suffering Christians, to encourage unwavering holiness amidst a seductive culture, to refute deception in the church, and then to fuel mission among the nations. Folks, let's face it, the church is under attack from all sides, from opposition on the outside to deception on the inside. John writes this book as a letter to say to persecuted Christians of the first century who are facing threats against their lives, and to suffering Christians in the 21st century who are in battle for their faith. John says, you may think things are out of control as you see beasts coming up out of the abyss to make war on your faith and persecute your lives. But take heart, Christ has conquered Satan, and Christ has conquered hell, and Christ has conquered death, and Christ is in control. He sees your tears, he hears your cries, and he will rise you up to reign with him as king forever. So fight for your faith and fight to advance the gospel to the ends of the earth. I mean, that's the point of the book. The book is not intended to drive us to charts. This book is intended to drive us to Christ, to one another in the church, and to the Great Commission. John wrote that for this reason. That's why God revealed it this way. These visions include various symbols and numbers, which often lead to various interpretations. Now, all throughout Revelation, as we just said, we have visions, and that's what the book is comprised of, visions that God gave the Apostle John in the first century. And we've seen these visions include various symbols and numbers, and sorry, my computer's decided to have a nervous breakdown. What are you doing? There are days. Sorry guys, my computer's decided that it's going to have a nervous breakdown. Right here, right now. Don't ask me why. But that's the point of the book, is to prepare us, and to prepare us for what's coming, as we live in a world that's so crazy and getting crazier. I want you to see that what's important here is that we're looking at, we look at this from a different point of view than they did. So I want us to understand how the first century church would have seen this, because I think it's important for us to understand what was meant here. So I am not going to read the 2 chapters to you. I'm going to let you read those on your own. I do encourage you to read them. We're now a little over halfway through the series on Revelation, and 6 out of 13 weeks left, including today. So what I want to do is start with a quick review of what we've seen in Revelation and a couple of key things we've talked about when it comes to understanding Revelation. Then from there on, I want us to think about what I believe is one of the most difficult, yes, also one of the most important questions for us as Christians as we read the book of Revelation. So let's start with a quick review. The book of Revelation, as we said, is a series of apocalyptic visions filled with prophetic pronouncements written as a congregational letter. You got to remember, this was written for the churches to pass around. They didn't have a New Testament at this point. They had the Old Testament. Okay. But these are pastoral letters, is what they boil down to. We saw from the first week from the book of Revelation is a series of apocalyptic visions filled with prophetic pronouncements written as a congregational letter. Now, that's a loaded sentence that sums up the unique nature of the book. It is apocalyptic literature. It means uncovering or revelation of truth through visions. At the same time, this is prophecy about the future that is bearing on the present. The book is the climax of all prophecy in the Bible. And in all of this, it's also a letter written to churches in the first century and to the church in all centuries that is specifically addressing life as Christian in this world. The church is under attack, folks. That's all there is to it. But I want you to understand that even though it seems like the world has gone crazy, that everything is falling apart, that it's not. That God is in control. Okay? Now, we've seen symbols like a lamb and a dragon and beast and locust like horse with human faces and lion's teeth and wings and tails like scorpions. And we've seen numbers like 4 and 7 and 12 and 140,000 and 666. Each of these numbers representing different realities. This is where the book of Revelation seems to open itself to all kinds of different interpretations associated with these symbols and numbers. Throughout the history of the church, Bible-believing, gospel-preaching men and women have understood some of these things differently. And no one on earth has the corner on truth regarding exactly how all this book should be understood. Some Bible readers take many of these things to be literal. They believe when John says this or that is going to happen in this way, he's saying these things are going to happen literally in these ways. Other Bible scholars take different symbols and attach them to different historical realities, interpreting various parts of Revelation in light of modern day events in Israel or other nations. And I think has probably been clear, I understand Revelation more symbolically, and the way I describe it is based on what one brother said. Greg Bale, who wrote a massive commentary on the book of Revelation, addresses people who ask him why he takes his book symbolically instead of literally, and he points out how John, in the very first verse of Revelation, uses allusions to Daniel in the Old Testament. He tells us that this book is going to be filled with symbols. So he says that he takes the book symbolically precisely because he takes John's words in the first verse literally. When John literally tells us that he's about to use a bunch of symbols. That's right there in the first chapter of Revelation. And that's a key point. Just because we interpret something symbolically here in the book of Revelation doesn't mean we have license in to interpret everything in the Bible symbolically, however we want. This is a genre of biblical literature, apocalypsis, which uses symbols and numbers strategically in a way that narrative literature, for example, doesn't. So I don't want you to run around and say, well, Pastor Mike says the Bible doesn't need to be taken literal. I didn't say that. I'm saying the book of Revelation has parts of it that we struggle to understand literally. Now, don't get me wrong, and you won't hear me say this, and I want you to be really careful what you think here. Okay? Just because you can take it symbolically does not mean some of it will not happen literally. Okay? It's possible to be both. So when you read stories about the Red Sea splitting in half or Mary as a virgin giving birth to Jesus, we by no means have license to say, well, those stories are just symbolic. They didn't really happen. No, that type of literature in the Bible is clearly recording historical, actual events, and we read them as such. At the same time, other types of biblical literature use symbols strategically. And it's not just Revelation. It's poetry like the Song of Solomon. When the writer says to the woman, your hair is like a flock of goats, your teeth are like a flock of sheep, and your nose is like the Tower of Lebanon. We know for various reasons these things are not literal. Okay? We're not going to run around, don't go up to your wife and say, well, your hair is like a flock of goats. Woo! That'll get her excited, right? Please. That's not literal. He's not saying you got a goat head. Okay? So there's no question that here in Revelation we have predominant and intentional use of symbols and numbers. We have 7 bowls of wrath that are being poured out on the earth. 7 is a strategic and symbolic number that we've seen throughout Revelation. Bowls are filled with God's wrath. Does this mean they're literally filled with liquid wrath that is literally poured out? But all of these images of painful sores and bloody water and sun scorching heat and people gnawing at their tongues in anguish, are all these literal or symbolic? And if symbolic, what do they stand for? So you can see how these symbols and numbers sometimes lead to different interpretations. Please bear with me and understand that this is the place where I probably vary from many, many biblical scholars. And we'll tell you why. Okay, I've gotten in some really interesting discussions with people who say, well, I'm a pre-tribulation rapture. You know what that means? They believe sometime before the beginning of the book of Revelation, the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period, God is going to take all the Christians off this planet. And then anybody left, there's going to be people get saved during that, but they're getting saved. And again, I do not believe that to be the case. Number one, God never promised us we would not suffer tribulation. So I personally believe in what's called a pre-wrath rapture. I believe that because Christians will never suffer God's wrath, and God's pouring out his wrath on the planet, whatever that is literally, that means he's pouring out his wrath. We're out of here because we will never suffer his wrath as believers. Now, the point of all this, and I'm trying to mention this time and again, is that how one interprets Revelation is never for a reason for a division in the church. I've gotten a couple of stringing letters and comments, but I hope you're seeing that Bible-believing, gospel-embracing Christians in the same church may have disagreements over exactly what this or that means in Revelation, and that's okay. What I'm trying to do is point out that there are different opinions on this among Bible-believing, gospel-embracing Christians. But let's not miss the point. The book of Visions was written to encourage the original readers and us to persevere in our faith. So realize who we are in Christ and to fight amidst the suffering for the spread of the gospel. So let's keep coming back to that. Now, these visions are arranged cyclically, not chronologically. You say, okay, what does that mean, Pastor Mike? Well, that doesn't mean that, remember, we've talked about this before, that generally the way the Hebrews told a story is they told it cyclically. You know what I mean by that? Okay, if you go back to the book of Revelation, and I've had a lot of people argue, well, they call it the gap theory. They basically say that the first part of the book of Genesis, there's a gap where God destroys the world and remakes it. And that's when the angels fell, and they've got all this big... Guys, let me be real careful here and be real clear. The Hebrew literature, especially historical literature, tends to start at a point, lay out the broad strokes, and then circle back around and add in more detail. And they keep circling out, adding more detail each time. And that's what's going on in Genesis. And I kind of believe that's what's going on in Revelation. Now, all that to say this. Okay? I need to be real clear. If my interpretation of the book of Revelation is wrong, and God comes and he comes back and everything happens literally, I am not going to argue with God. This is his revelation. He knows what it means. I don't. All I'm doing is guessing if I've got to sit here and interpret it all. Because God didn't give me a special notebook that says here's the cheat sheet for the book of Revelation. Then I saw another sign in heaven. That doesn't mean this is what's going to happen next in history. Instead, we've seen how these visions are repeating one another, and they're intensifying a lot, so he's circling out. Think about what we've seen so far, going all the way back to chapter 2. Since that time, we've seen 7 letters, seats, trumpets, visions, bowls. In Revelation 2 and 3, we see 7 letters to 7 churches. Then, after a throne room scene in Revelation 4 and 5, starting in Revelation 6, we see the opening of 7 seals. At the end of the 7 seals, at the beginning of chapter 8, we see final judgment poured out on the earth. But then, right after that, we see 7 angels with 7 trumpets, and judgment start all over again, seemingly from the beginning. And that leads us all the way to chapter 11, the 7th trumpet, that final judgment again is poured out on the earth. And then, right after that, we go back in time to the coming of Christ and the battle of Satan against God, his son, and the people in human history with a dragon and beast and a lamb and the harvest imagery on the earth. But all of that leads to today, where we, in a sense, start over again with 7 angels and 7 plagues pictured by 7 bowls of wrath. And this cycle repeats itself all over again. So these visions are arranged in cycles like this. With each cycle, things are intensifying. It's getting harder and harder and tougher each time. It keeps circling back out. Remember with the seals, the fourth of the earth destroyed, and then with the trumpet, the third of the earth impacted. Now with the bowls, all of the earth is affected. In addition, the seals and the trumpets often affected people indirectly. But here, these bowls are poured out directly upon the people of the earth. So there is an intensification going on here in each of these. Summarized here, you've seen 7 seals and trumpets and visions and bowls that are chronologically parallel to one another, but at the same time, they are intensifying as you progress, almost like a spiral heading toward the final vision of wrath, the judgment and salvation that unfold from this point in Revelation. This leads to these 7 bowls that recap or repeat what we've already seen, except with more all-encompassing devastation. John tells us in Revelation 15, right, these are the last plagues, and with them the wrath of God is finished. By the time you get to chapter 16, these plagues are described as 7 bowls of wrath of God, as each of these bowls are poured out upon the earth. You see infractions of the plagues when God struck the Egyptians back in the book of Exodus, and he delivered his people from slavery. The imagery of the bowls crystallizes the theme of wrath. Old Testament prophecy, God's wrath was described as stored in a cup or a bowl, ready to be poured out upon his enemies who rebel against him and his people. So here in Revelation 16, that's exactly what happens. Now again, there are different interpretations on when these things are actually going to happen. Some have said all of these judgments happened symbolically in the first century. So others say that these things are happening in all of history between the first and second coming of Christ. So these things are happening in a sense now. And still others say that these things will happen only at a time in the future yet to come. I lean more toward the understanding that these visions are illustrating all that is going on between the first and second coming of Christ. But I also believe a lot of this describes what's going to happen before Christ's second coming. These things